I'm sure, just like me, you're feeling a bit helpless and overwhelmed when it comes to dealing with the bushfire crisis. And we need to remember that this is a marathon, not a sprint. So I've enlisted the help of my good friend and psychologist Sandy Rea to help us navigate how to look after our own mental health and that of others during this recovery period. Sandy, our bushfire survivors and responders have seen some pretty horrific scenes. What are some common reactions?
You know, you're so right, Shelley. So much trauma has been experienced by so many people, children, families, grandparents, first responders. And it would be right for us to expect that they would suffer from what's called acute stress disorder. So, naturally, we're going to be very stressed about losing a house, about losing livestock, seeing pets, dead pets lying on the ground. We would expect people to start crying a lot, a sense of hopelessness, a sense of even fear or trepidation about what does my life look like moving forward. Acute stress disorder is manifested in many ways. For some people, it may be lots of flashbacks. For other people, it may be a need to talk and talk and talk about a particular thing that they may have experienced or witnessed, the sound of the fire, the smell of the fire. There might be the smell of burning flesh, the crying out of animals who are caught up in the fire. So all these provide ammunition for our brain and our emotions to feel rightfully very distressed.
And when does it tip over from stress to PTSD?
So PTSD is typically thought of as something that occurs after 2 to 3 weeks of acute stress. So naturally, when we first experience a trauma, our bodies are on high alert. Typically and generally, that sort of calms down. But when we find that we don't have the resources or things haven't changed in our environment or we're re-experiencing trauma, that goes on to PTSD. And PTSD is characterised by an emotional numbing. So what that means is I don't want to talk about it, I can't face it, I don't want to talk to you about it when you ask me a question, I disconnect from people around me. For some people, they may even dissociate, and that means that they just don't have a sense of reality. They go quite away from themselves, from reality. Again, I don't want people to be frightened when they witness that sort of behaviour. That is within the parameters of what I call normal reactions to a very significant trauma. Other people might experience hypervigilance or hyperarousal. Hypervigilance being on the alert for everything that's going on. Is there a sound? Is there a smell? And we know our olfactory senses are our greatest source of memory. So a smell of fire or even a barbecue might set that trauma off again. Flashbacks, intrusive thoughts, all those things are the things that characterise PTSD.
What about signs that you need to speak to a professional?
I think when you need to speak to a professional is when you really can't manage your mood states. So you might be abnormally aggressive, angry, triggered easily, you can't get sleep, you're not eating, all the things that we would say, this is a normal way of responding, but I can't manage it.
Now, there's a scary statistic about domestic violence after a crisis like this. Tell me about that.
So it's really interesting. The Australian Institute of Family Studies produced a really lovely paper, both scary, as you rightly said, and that is from the Black Saturday fires. And what they found was, I think it was about 28% increase in domestic or intimate partner violence. So we need to be really aware. We've got the figures, we've got the research. Now we know that it's the likelihood of men perpetrating violence against women as a result of the trauma of Black Saturday fires, which is what this is equivalent to. In fact, this is even on a much larger scale than Black Saturday fires. So these men are at risk. The trauma they've suffered, the loss of home, loss of income, no future employment, gets reflected into violence in their marriages or in their partners. So please be very diligent. We have what's called risk factors and we have protective factors. Risk factors are the trauma and not being managed. Protective factors are what can we put in place to ensure that families and children and women aren't at risk of this sort of violence.
Are there any positives that can come out of this?
I think one of the most important positives to come out of this is post-traumatic growth. So we look at mental illness and mental ill health, but what post-traumatic growth is saying is that we've had a trauma and we have learned different coping strategies to manage that trauma and strategies that we didn't even know existed in ourselves. So a way of identifying I've had my house burned down. What do I need to do to manage my environment? How do I put stability back in place? I didn't know I had that strength inside me. And it's a wonderful psychological positive outcome for, I guess, any trauma, whether it's a relationship trauma, whether it's a car accident, whether it's an act of violence. It's about identifying strengths inside yourself as a result of the trauma that you can put into use.
We hope this helps. Thanks, Sandy.